everybody there. Usually there is somebody standing there by the time I lift my head up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon, Ms. Norman. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, first, I think there's something wrong with my mic. Is it the echo? That's fine. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I wish to apologize for yesterday. I think one thing I learned from yesterday is that if I have an application to move, I must do it myself and not ask anyone to do it for me. I apologize. I happen to be one of the women that were chosen by the country to represent the values of Mama Sisulu, and that function and the announcement of those persons was happening yesterday. Then I requested my colleagues to stand in for me, but things didn't go the way I had planned. I sincerely apologize for that.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was advised, Mr. Chairman, that you would like to hear the application first today. Is that correct?
Yes, I would like us to deal with it quickly.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this is an application for condonation for the late filing of the Rule 3.3 notices on Mr. Wheatley, Mr. Bobert, Mr. Des van der Rooyen, and Mr. Mabaso. Mr. Mabaso is represented by Mr. Denga. He's present today. But on the day when I moved the application, the initial day, the representatives of the other three implicated persons were present, and they indicated that they were not opposing the application. And so does Mr. Denga. He also doesn't oppose it.
Okay.
Yes. I submit that, Mr. Chairperson, that a proper case is made out.
The delay was
the delay is a delay of actually 13 days.
13 days.
13 days, yes. Because these signed statements were received only on Friday, after 5 p.m. on Friday. Then we worked on the notices over the weekend, and they were issued on Monday morning. And as a result of that, then, because the first witness was going to testify on Tuesday, and then by the time that witness had testified, the implicated persons had only had 1 day to deal and have a look at the notices. And I did explain to Mr. Denga that because it's due to the lateness of the issuing of the notices, therefore there are 14, we're going to apply to the chairperson that their 14-day period not be interrupted by the fact that the witnesses have testified, that they be afforded the exact 2 weeks for them to put up their version and deal with the matter in the manner in which they deem appropriate.
Yes.
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 If the chairperson is satisfied with the explanation given.
Yeah, no, that's
Yes.
in order.
Yes.
What's the prayer one would be condonation?
Condonation, and then prayer 2 is, in fact, prayer 2 and 3, they are kind of repetitive, save that in prayer 3, the persons affected are mentioned by name.
Yeah.
The orders then that we're seeking are in paragraph 1, 2, and 3, Mr. Chair. Yes.
Okay.
Of the notice of motion, which appears at pages 1 to 2 of the bundle.
Okay, condonation is granted in regard to the failure of the Commission's legal team to comply with the rules of the Commission in relation to the timeless delivery or service of the Rule 3.3 notices. Does that cover everything?
That covers everything. As the chairperson, please. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the second of the 3 Treasury witnesses is Mr. Dondo Mukhajani. He is ready to testify.
If that is the correct pronunciation, I would like you to repeat it. Otherwise, I'll ask the DG to give the correct pronunciation because I would have pronounced it very differently. So, and I believe in trying to pronounce people's names and surnames correctly. Yes. Do you know whether you have got the pronunciation right?
As I have it from the statement signed by him, is Mukhajani, M-O-G-A-J-A-N-E.
Yeah, no, the spelling I know. It's just that I would have said Gajan instead of Hajan. No. So that's why I'm saying I want to get the correct pronunciation. But the DG will indicate in due course if we are not pronouncing it correctly. Okay, thank you. Registrar, you can administer the oath or the affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
My name is Andrew Dondo Mokajane.
Do you have any objection with taking the prescribed oath?
I don't have any objection.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes, I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
Mr. Mokajane, first thing first, how do you pronounce your name?
My surname is Mokajane.
Mukhajane. Have I got it right?
Yes, Chair, you got it right.
Thank you. I don't want people not pronouncing my surname correctly or even saying Zondi, so I don't want to pronounce anybody's surname wrongly. Thank you.
Mr. Mokajane, for the purposes of your evidence, we will be working with one bundle only. And Chair, that will be Exhibit P, the bundle that we used yesterday.
Well, I just asked the registrar a few minutes before we came in whether we needed all these bundles, and she said that somebody said to be on the safe side, they must all be brought in. And I said, the moment somebody says to be on the safe side,
Yes.
it means they didn't apply their mind
Yes.
to whether it's needed
Yes.
or not.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, all right.
That's silent laziness. Chair, the statement of Mr. Mokajane begins at page 44 of Exhibit P.
Did you say 84?
4-4.
Oh, okay. Thank you, I've got it.
You will see that page 44, it's a title page, together with the index of the statement. And then page 45 is the table of contents, and the substantive statement begins from page 46. And that's where I would like to start, Mr. Mokajane. It is now common ground that you are the present Director General of the National Treasury, correct?
Yes, it's correct.
When were you appointed?
I was appointed Director General of the National Treasury on the 8th of June 2017.
And we heard the witness who testified before you that he was your predecessor and he left office sometime in May 2017.
Yes, that's correct.
And that is Mr. Lungisa Fuzile.
Yes, sir.
What happened between June and May to that office?
I was appointed Acting Director General after Mr. Fuzile left the National Treasury, and I was formally appointed by Cabinet on the 8th of June 2017.
So you acted for more or less a period of a month before
Yes.
your final and permanent occupation of that office. Can I ask you to just give us a sense of your qualifications?
I have a Bachelor of Administration degree that I acquired at the University of Durban-Westville. I also have 2 honors degrees, one in public management and the other one in industrial relations and human resources, that I also acquired, both of them acquired at the University of Durban-Westville. I also have a certificate of public management and financial management from Harvard University. I also have a master's degree from the University of Maryland in public management, and I acquired this from the University of Maryland in the United States.
Or in Washington?
Yes, no, yes, in Washington, Maryland, yeah.
Well, I note, Mr. Mokajane, that you studied in KZN, and your predecessor also did study in KZN, so I think KZN is making some contribution to National Treasury.
Indeed, KZN is, or those of us who studied at KZN are contributing positively in South Africa.
And in case you don't know, Mr. Mokajane, we wisely boast that KZN, especially the University of Zululand, has produced 3 successive Chief Justices of this country. And we hope that in due course it will add to that number. Mr. Mahajan, in paragraph 1, you set out in detail your employment history in National Treasury beginning from 1999. Is there any other historic employment matter before you joined National Treasury that you think important to bring to the attention of the chairperson?
Yes, Advocate, I can do that. Before I joined the university, before I joined National Treasury, I was a lecturer at the Technikon South Africa, and before then, I was full-time employed at the University of Durban-Westville. I was in the student housing division, and I was responsible for student housing. And on a part-time basis, I was also teaching at the University of Durban-Westville. And at the same time, I was also teaching part-time at the ML Sultan Technikon in Durban.
All right. So you have a fair amount of academic background.
In my early years,
yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes. There are 2 aspects of your official duties in National Treasury that I'd like to highlight and emphasize for the purposes of your testimony. The first is that position which you occupied from May 2014 to May 2015 as the Chief Operating Officer in National Treasury. Do you see that?
Yes, I can see that.
Can you give us a sense of what your general, broad, official functions and duties were in that regard?
Thank you. Before I go on to answering that question, can I also explain that in 2000, between 2000 and 2001, which is also material, I had left the Treasury for 1 year, and I was with EDA Trust, Environmental and Development Agency Trust, an NGO based in Braamfontein, and it is that year, so it's also important that I was a deputy director at that NGO just for 1 year, and I rejoined National Treasury in 2001 in September of that year.
Yes.
So
thanks for that addition. Can we get back to your general functions as the COO
yes.
of National Treasury for that 1 year period?
After the elections in 2014 and after Minister Gordon, because I was his chief of staff before then.
I'll get to that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
As COO, having been around, the position exists at a DDG level in the National Treasury. My duty was basically to be a liaison between the office of the DG and the office and the rest of the National Treasury, including the office of the minister at the time. And at the time, it was Minister Nene who was the minister.
Yeah, but what were you doing as a COO?
As COO, I was simply, in most cases, representing the DG internally, taking matters outside the Treasury where the office of the DG was needed in terms of liaison, ensuring that in government it's very interesting. Government, it depends where you're coming from and what your level is. Yes. Now, if you are asked as the minister, the office of the DG to engage with other departments, and a DDG comes, then they sometimes want to insist that they engage with the office of the DG. So it was easy for this role to be performed on behalf of, in some cases, on behalf of the DG's office, and I would interact, ensuring that the aspirations and objectives of the National Treasury are actually entrenched in the system of government as a whole, including liaising between various divisions of the Treasury and the office of the DG.
So in a sense, you were the technical gateway to the DG's office.
Yes, I can confirm, say yes.
The next office is the one that you have already presaged, and that's the office of Chief of Staff. We heard a lot about it yesterday, and I'd like you to solicit your views about it. Where does that office fit in within the administration of National Treasury?
As Chief of Staff, I am the head of the Office of the Minister. and the head, and that includes the office of the Deputy Minister, administratively so. I would then make sure that the rest of the National Treasury, including the office of the DG, I'm playing a liaison role between the office of the Minister and the rest of the National Treasury, and the office of the Minister and the rest of the administration, government as a whole, in terms of, again, what ministers' responsibilities are and how they are communicated to the rest of the department. And sometimes, because again, as I said, the authority of the ministry then becomes quite critical, and I represent a view or the authority of the minister as Chief of Staff.
And in that capacity, do you have any authority to issue instructions to, first, the DG?
I wouldn't put it like that. I would rather say in collaboration with the office of the DG, understanding that the DG is the one I enter into a contract with the DG. The DG is my direct, administratively and officially, so he becomes my supervisor. And as a result, the avoidance at all material instances would be to give or be seen to be giving instruction, or be seen to be superimposing myself on the DG or the Deputy Minister's office. So at any given point in time, collaboratively so, I would then not issue instructions, but requests, and in some cases, I would then directly engage with the department, but the DG would be aware.
So the short answer to my question is you would have no authority to give instructions to the DG?
I would not have authority at all to give instruction to the DG.
Conversely, would the DG have the capacity or the authority to issue instructions to you?
Yes, certainly the DG would give instruction to me, yes.
Second, would you have the authority as the Chief of Staff to issue instructions to any DDG or other management employees of National Treasury?
I would reasonable instructions in line with our work, but obviously in collaboration with the DG, and not, as I said, superimpose myself on the functioning of the administration of the National Treasury and the functioning of the DDGs.
Yes. I will get to the office that you occupied when the events that began on the Wednesday of the 9th of December 2015 unfolded. And before I do so, can I ask you to confirm that you had consulted through your lawyers with members of the legal team, and certainly not me, but some of my colleagues, correct?
Yes, I did consult.
And they invited you to make a statement and asked for your assistance in relation to the term of reference relating to paragraph 1.8 of the terms of reference. And I take it that you know what that paragraph 1.8 requires of the Commission.
Yes, I do.
And then you did so by compiling the statement which begins from page 46.
Yes, sir.
And the body of the statement ends at page 50, correct?
At page?
50.
50, yes, sir.
Typed page 6 at the bottom, correct?
Yes.
And then you only annex one annexure to that statement, which is the email accompanied by a media statement from pages 51 to 52, correct?
Yes, sir.
At page 50, there is a signature just above your name.
Yes, sir. That is my signature, yes.
Do you confirm that that is your signature?
Yes, sir. It is my signature.
And by that signature, you do confirm that you have read the contents of the statement and that they are true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief, correct?
Yes, correct.
Is there any part of the statement that you would wish to alter, modify, or supplement
No, not at this stage, no, not at all.
On that premise, can we now begin with the office that you occupied when the events I have indicated took place? What was your position in Treasury around that period of December 2015?
At the time of that period, I was Deputy Director General responsible for public finance at the National Treasury.
Can you repeat that again?
I was the Deputy Director General responsible for public finance at the National Treasury.
Yes. And what were your general responsibilities?
My general responsibilities included liaison and overseeing expenditure and revenue issues in relation to all national government departments and public entities under those national government departments.
Yes.
And assisting the budget office in preparation of the national budget, including liaison on behalf of the National Treasury with various bodies in Parliament, various parliamentary committees. In particular, the SCOF, which is the Standing Committee on Finance, Standing Committee on Appropriations, Standing Committee on Public Accounts, and other committees as and when we have been requested to engage on behalf of National Treasury insofar as public national entities are concerned and national government departments.
Yes. You heard the chairman yesterday made an appeal to Mr. Fuzile, who in turn said that you are the appropriate person to deal with the chairperson's appeal around information regarding the extent of business and revenue that the Gupta-related entities would have procured from state or government business. You remember, or do you have any knowledge of that appeal?
Yes, I do have knowledge of what Mr. Fuzile was referring to.
Yes.
Because at the time, the National Treasury did do some estimates in terms of the impact of what then was finally called the Nenegate, the impact that it had. And again, I requested my economic policy team to then remodel the impact of that, the impact that that had.
I think we're speaking across purpose, and let me make it quite clear what is the context of the appeal that the chairperson has extended. And I assume that you would want to talk about the consequences of the so-called Nenegate. We'll get to that. But the appeal was made in the context of the evidence which has now been placed before the chairperson through the evidence of then Minister Jonas, Deputy Minister Jonas, who I take, you know him.
Yes, I know him.
He told the chairperson at some point in the course of his evidence that a member of the Gupta family said to him when they had a conversation in October 2015 that they receive revenue from their business with government entities in the order of 6 billion, I think, chairperson, and that they would like to push it up, ramp it up to 8 billion. For that reason, they wanted Mr. Jonas to assist them. The appeal is in that context, and it is this. Can you, in National Treasury, confirm the extent of business and associated revenue the Gupta-owned or controlled entities have received from government? Can you model that revenue stream, especially in relation to 2015 financial year? And can you please produce that type of data to us?
So yes, I will certainly do that. I have already actioned what came through yesterday. I've asked our Chief Procurement Office, together with our Financial Management Office, to model the cost and the revenue that would have been accrued to the Gupta Empire. And when it's available, I will certainly make it available to the Commission.
And if I may give you some kind of indication of what the information we're looking for is. It relates to revenue.
Yes, revenue.
I'll be surprised if you can give us information relating to the cost structure of those business entities.
No, I will not be able to give you the cost structures.
Yes. Yes. That we will
May-
get. Sorry, Chair.
You can continue. Maybe what I wanted to say is what you want to say.
No, Chair. I think
Just to make sure that you have correct understanding, one of the aspects that the information must address, particularly the one that we are asking for, but it won't hurt if we get more, is whether as at 2015, maybe 2014, 2015, 2013, 2014, 2015, what revenue were Gupta-related entities obtaining annually from government and maybe SOEs? Yeah. So, so that's what we would very much like to know.
Yes, no, thank you, Chair. I will certainly look at it like that. Revenues, state-owned companies and national government from the period 2013 to 2015.
yes. I think it's fairly straightforward from national departments because we are told that they have a bus system that they utilize to track and trace payments from various expenses. But it would be difficult, we are told, insofar as state-owned enterprises are concerned.
It will certainly be difficult for state-owned companies and municipalities.
Yes.
For provincial departments and national departments, through the basic accounting system, we should be able to get the information.
Yes, and that's a bus system.
Yes, the bus system.
Yes, thank you. And just to conclude on that score, this may well be.
Before you conclude, you say it would be difficult with municipalities.
Yes.
Just difficult, needing more time in order to be achieved, or it will be impossible?
It will not be impossible. It will mean we'll have to engage all 250 plus municipalities because they are not on the same system.
Oh, okay.
So, and that includes state-owned companies. It is going to be difficult for state-owned companies, but however, because most state-owned companies will be better structured than most of the challenges that we have in municipalities. So accumulating such data is not impossible, but we will try all sorts of
Yes.
ways of trying to get the information.
Okay, no, that's fine. Obviously, you might be able to produce exact figures, but if you ask me if what you get is not exact, but is a reasonable estimate, I won't complain.
Okay.
But obviously, if you can get exact, that's first prize.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And the point is, you can churn out the information in batches. So the information that is easy and quick to produce, you can send that to us. And the one that is difficult, on which you may well have to do reasonable estimates, can be brought in later. We are under tight control and tight timelines. We would like to have that information fairly quick. You had indicated that there were some adverse financial and macroeconomic consequences flowing from the so-called Nenegate, and you deal with those consequences in paragraph 4 of your statement at page 47. Can we get to it? Because you seem to suggest that you have reflected on those consequences and you have done some additional research through those who report to you. Can I start here? We know that that week began on the 7th of December, Monday, 2015, correct?
Yes.
During that week, as far as you are aware, Was National Treasury aware of any possible dismissal of Minister Nene, including yourself? In other words, did you have any idea or suspicion that Minister Nene might well be removed from office?
I only became aware on the Tuesday, the 8th of December, through an article that I read on Independent Online that was forwarded by one of the colleagues in the Treasury. And in that article, in newspaper online article, it was indicated that Minister Nene might be replaced by Mr. Van Rooyen.
Yes. But that's corridor gossip. All I'm trying to establish from you is, was there any official communication conveyed to you about the possible removal of Minister Nene? Yes or no, as far as
No, there was no official communication.
Yes. So when you began that Monday and you went to Cabinet on the 9th of December, it was business as usual.
Yes, it was business as usual.
And then we already know that there was some speculation around the 8th of Minister Nene's possible removal, and that speculation became real on the 9th of December, correct?
Yes, correct.
Yes. And you say in paragraph 4 that there were serious adverse consequences flowing from the removal of Minister Nene. And I'd like you to get there and explain to us in your own words what those consequences were.
There was indeed what I term as a catastrophic fall of the rand at the time, and the impact was that we saw about 148,000 jobs lost in terms of the model that we ran. We saw a reduction of about 378 billion rand in the JSE market capitalization. And we also say costed the impact to at least 1.1% of GDP by the end of that year, 2017. That, for me, are the three variables that we looked at in the model that I requested my team's economic policy team in the Treasury to run for me.
Yes. And can we be clear, because people like us who don't understand the quantification of that impact may assume that, for instance, the 148,000 jobs which were lost would have been lost as a result of that event on that day. But your model does not suggest that, as I understand it. You look at that significant event over a period around which you calculate the effect, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And can you indicate to us that what was the period that you nominated for that calculation and quantification?
We nominated the period from the announcement of Mr. Nene's exiting from the system until the replacement before the Asian markets opened on that Sunday, until around Sunday. So that was the period. But however, the impact will have carried through costs.
Yes.
Obviously, that ran through, and the impact would have been felt throughout.
Yes.
Effectively, and the impact of which one can say lasted for a much longer period than the 3 days that Mr. Nene before was replaced.
Yes.
Yeah. So the impact is much longer. It's not just because of 1 day.
Yes, and I understand that, and I want to see the extrapolation. What is the longer period for that effect around which you made the calculation?
Look, in terms of the impact that we saw, and the as you say, Chair, one can say I don't have the exact date timelines, but it's the impact that we saw much later, and one can even say the impact can be even felt by now. I don't think we were able ever to recover in a way that we had lost the market recapitalization of about a capitalization of about 370 billion. The JSE has never recovered to that level. So the impact we're still experiencing to date.
Understand that, but for the purposes of our calculation, you use matrices such as quarter period, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Sometimes you use a financial year, sometimes you use a 6 months period. I just want to understand whether the calculation relates to the whole financial year after December 2015, or it related to a quarter or 6 months thereafter.
One can say, Chair, it is the period in terms of the numbers that I have, because the high frequency data that we have, one can see that the impact in 2015, recovery was only started being recognized and noticed around 2016, in quarter 2 of 2016. That's when recovery started being experienced and realized.
So on a straight line calculation, it will be about a period of 6 months. More
Of
or less.
6 months, it could be, yes.
Then you indicate that there was a reduction of the JSC capital value of 378 billion rand. And then you say that GDP shrunk by 1.1%, correct?
Yes, sir.
There are, of course, other macroeconomic adverse consequences which flowed from this. And Minister Gordhan and also Mr. Fuzile did talk about them because they say that ordinary members such as ourselves don't appreciate it until we feel it at the counters of the supermarkets. The cost of living would rise as a result of these adverse macroeconomic consequences. Do you have any comment to make in that regard?
Yes, I do have a comment. Business confidence was at its lowest as we approached January of that year. And that's why Minister Gordhan in his statement would have indicated that there was clearly a need to rally around each other as a country and various sectors of the economy, business, labor, and government. And the first such engagements was around the 23rd of January when business came together with government. After the Davos meeting, CEOs came at very short notice to meet. And by March, we had a plan to do something about it, because if business confidence at its lowest, it means then it impacts on investor sentiment, and you wouldn't see any new investments coming through. And that's why in March of that year, we went on a very, call it intensive roadshow with business, labor, and government as a block. We went to the US, we went to Europe to explain that the fundamentals are still in place and that South Africa is still open for business. And it was a very difficult conversation in March of 2016 that we had with these global investors because we had seen the impact and we were not recovering at all in terms of what they saw as clearly the challenge that South Africa was experiencing at the time.
One thing that I'd like you to comment on, as part and parcel of this adverse consequence, and I'm not too sure if it was covered by both Minister Gordhan and Mr. Fuzile, relates to whether or not these consequences might impact on the cost of our country's ability to service its sovereign debt. By that I mean, would the depreciation of the currency as a result of these things impact on your cost of servicing the debt which our country incurs?
The cost of servicing debt would certainly rise when the country is faced with such environments and situations. By just the movement in the rand, as an example, because we have to service our debt. Our debt to GDP is pegged to a certain exchange rate assumption. And once that changes, then clearly there's impact. Now, we go, and Mr. Fuzile did correctly indicate that at the time, we would go into the market on a weekly basis and raise anything between 9 and 14 billion rand. Now, if at the level of the performance of the economy, you are not doing well, and you are too risky as a as a potential client to investors or people who actually lend you money.
Yes.
The money will be more expensive. In simple terms, I normally explain to people that if you have to buy a car or you want to get a home loan and you are listed at the credit bureau, some lenders will still say, at least you have a job, but they will give you at prime, maybe even prime plus 5%, because you are risky. And if you're okay, they'll even go and give you prime less 2%, if you've got a stable job and your ability to pay is not questionable. Now, if the country's situation is such that the performance of the country, performance of the economy is not at a level where we will give comfort to people who lend us money, then it becomes very expensive. And that translates, therefore, into your debt rising, because you will borrow at very high rates, including, again, the cost of servicing your debt. And thus, then, your debt service cost increases to levels that will be difficult to manage as time goes on.
Yes. Thank you for that. Lastly, on that issue, if you have a modeling exercise which you may have done to quantify the effects of this renegade on the country's ability to service its debt, that will be useful. And you can use the indicators such as, we borrow our money in foreign currency, and yet our revenue is raised in terms of the local currency. And so if the local currency goes down, obviously the repayment is going to be higher by that fact alone. But if our creditors would have said, look, you are risky, and therefore we would want to protect ourselves, and they make calculations that impact on our ability, you can do so. So what we're interested in are the figures. If you have them, we will be grateful for that exercise.
Yes,
Okay.
we will certainly make them available.
You then talk about the events of the 11th of December from paragraph 5 of your statement, on page 47. You talk about a meeting with Minister van Rooyen that was scheduled to begin at 11 a.m. that morning. How did you get to know about that meeting yourself?
We got notification from the office of the DG Fuzile at the time that there will be a meeting at 11 a.m. to meet with the new minister, and this notice was sent to all deputy director generals.
And you received one of them? You received that notice?
Yes, I did receive the notice.
And so you were ready for that meeting?
I was ready for the meeting.
Yes. And then what happened when 11 o'clock struck?
We waited. We were in the big boardroom. DG's boardroom, as we call it. DG's boardroom on the second floor, 40 Church Square. And then, as usual, we were all excited that we were going to see and meet the new minister.
And when you say we, who was there, to the best of your recollection?
There were a number of colleagues.
Who were there?
There were a number of colleagues, DDGs. I don't have a list of colleagues that were there, but there were a number of colleagues who are DDGs, and some who were representing the office of the DDGs, because most people were on leave, as it was around the 11th of December. So most people were on leave, but there could have been a sizable number of colleagues. I remember a few. Mr. Monale was in the meeting. Wendy Fano was in a meeting. Mr. Momoniat came late, and a few others.
Mr. Sachs, was he there?
Mr. Sachs was not in the meeting. He was on leave.
Okay. All right. So you're waiting in excitement for the new minister. What happened thereafter?
As we were waiting, the new minister walked in with two gentlemen that I did not know. I have never met before. I was meeting them for the first time. And shortly, as soon as they walked in, then they were followed by Mr. Fuzile, and we all sat down waiting for the meeting to start.
Yes. It is now the evidence before the chairperson that those two gentlemen who walked with the minister were Mr. Mohammed Bobat and Mr. Ian Whitley. You yourself did not know them?
Yes, I did not know them.
Had you met them before?
I have never met them before. I was seeing them for the first time.
Had you heard about the name Mohammed Bobat and the name Ian Whitley before?
Not at all. I was hearing them about them for the first time.
Yes. All right. And you say in paragraph 7 that before that meeting, you had been busy with a media statement.
Yes.
Okay. And you indicate that that media statement, well, let me not lead it, let me ask you, how did it come about that you were engaged in that media statement?
I was engaged to the media statement because of the situation at the time. The rand was taking a beating. The narrative in the public was very negative, and I was worried that we are quiet as a national treasury. The presidency is quiet in terms of what happened. Because at the time, I had developed a very good working relationship when I was chief of staff with the head of the office of the president, Ms. Lakela Kaunda. I was in touch with her on the days after Mr. Van Rooyen was announced as the new minister. Actually, I recall her on Thursday, the early morning after the announcement, when, because we had a very close relationship, close working relationship, when she sent me a message and say, you know, we did not see this coming. And I said, look, it's tough, but we have to stand firm. But as the time goes by, the office of the president was quiet. And the treasury, and I could imagine, Mr. Fuzile was busy with, with, as he said, what he was busy with on Thursday, at the swearing-in ceremonies, etc. So we then agreed with Ms. Lakela Kaunda that I think it is better that we issue the statement to calm the markets, to explain, because we had accepted that Mr. Van Rooyen is going to be the Minister of Finance. Yes. So we realized that the best is at least to calm the markets and indicate to the markets and everyone who wishes to listen that South Africa is still keeping the fundamentals in place. And those fundamentals that I was talking about are captured in the draft statement that I sent to Ms. Lakela that day.
The point of the inquiry is this. Did you take it upon yourself, together with Ms. Kaunda, to formulate a statement, or did someone within the National Executive ask you to do so?
There was no one at the National Executive I was engaged with at the time, because it was a free fall in terms of the performance of the economy. I, as knowing the impact as a responsible National Treasury official, and obviously talking among some of my colleagues who I was waiting for inputs, and Mr. Fuzile, as you can imagine, I was not in touch with him at the time because I did not see him actually on Thursday. Yes. I only saw him on Friday morning. Yes. And so as a result, I did it upon myself in connection with the Office of the President, Ms. Kaunda, to make sure that at least we calm the markets, because I knew the impact of calming that markets.
Yes. You heard yesterday I did cover and converse with Mr. Fuzile about the fact that it was a crisis moment which was unfolding right in front of his eyes, and that there was a need for critical leadership intervention, and yet there was none. You took it upon yourself to try and solicit some intervention in order to address that crisis.
Yes, I did. I did take it upon myself.
And you say so because of your sense of responsibility.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Look at, I'm going to jump all over like a cat on hot bricks, if you don't mind. Look at the statement, which is at page 52. and we'll get to its contents in a moment. But page 51, it's an email. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Where does it come from?
It's an email coming from me, and I'm sending it to Lakela, and I have copied Pumla Williams and Nebo, who both of them were at GCIS at the time.
And you'll see that it was sent on Friday, the very day that you had a meeting, and it was sent at almost an hour after the scheduled commencement time of the meeting, 11:58 a.m. Do you see that?
It is 11:41
11:41.
and 58 seconds.
I'm sorry. You sent it at 11:41. Okay. So you must have sent it sometime after the meeting.
Yes, I did send it after the meeting, because at the meeting itself, I was having my laptop with me, and I was busy writing the statement when the meeting was taking place with Mr. Van Roy.
So you had a divided attention.
I was more interested in calming the markets, because I could see that with that meeting we were not going anywhere.
Yes. That's dexterity par excellence. But anyway, let's look at your statement. It is at page 52, Chairperson.
Page?
5-2.
Thank you.
You indicate that it's a draft statement, correct?
Yes, it was a draft statement.
It had not been issued to the media houses, correct?
Not at all at this time, no.
Yes. And then in the first unnumbered paragraph of that statement, you record a historical fact. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
But then you raise in the last sentence of that paragraph, policy questions, and you say, let me quote so that we are on the same wavelength. Our fiscal policy continues to anchor on the principles of counter-cyclicality, debt sustainability, and intergenerational fairness. I mean, these are big phrases. I'm not going to ask you to decode them for us, but it seems to me that these are major policy issues. Why did you consider it necessary to incorporate these fundamental policy principles in your statement or draft statement?
I decided to put these three basic policy principles because in the budget of that year, the February budget, and confirmed in the medium-term budget policy statement of that year, we wanted to, and this is what was the pillar of what we presented, and that was the storyline of our budget, that counter-cyclicality will be what we want to do, meaning when the economy is not doing well, we will have to come in. We are going to approach our debt sustainably. We are not going to borrow to a point where it actually impacts us negatively. And with intergenerational fairness, we are saying we were not going to burden future generations in terms of our fiscal policy. Now, the narrative at the time, this is what we are punting out there to investors and to South Africans around what our fiscal policy stands. So the departure of a statement like that would have made sure that South Africa has not deviated from maintaining these. Why am I saying debt sustainability? The issue at the time, as Mr. Fuzile indicated, was around nuclear financing. The issue was around higher education challenges that we saw manifesting themselves 2-3 years later. So by saying we are going to maintain this, effectively would have calmed people down that thought we are going to go, we are going to break this policy framework that we had set for ourselves. So by putting it up right there as paragraph number 1, that was the intention, to calm that view out there that was already suggesting that we are not going to respect what we said in the budget of that year.
Yes. Chair, you'd recall that Minister Godin said that at that point in time, the estimate for the nuclear procurement would be in the order of 1 trillion rand. And yet, the revenues expected for that financial year would be in the order of 800 billion. So there would essentially be a shortfall. And that would mean that your debt would rise, and therefore you would not be able to manage it. And as we borrow more and more, of course, you would ultimately not be able to raise debt. And you'll be left with one source, and that is the IMF. That will come with its own structural adjustment conditionalities, as you know them.
Yes.
Anyway, I am going to skip paragraph 2. That is the unnumbered paragraph 2, unless you want to comment on it.
Paragraph 2 is important because expenditure ceiling is what has defined South Africa's policy, fiscal policy stance to date. And meaning the ceiling that we had set at the medium-term budget policy statement, it is actually confirming what you have just indicated as part of the cost that was going to be on us if we have to go embark on a nuclear financing arrangement, which would have costed us in excess of $1 trillion at the time. So by saying that we will adhere to the expenditure ceiling while maintaining a stable trajectory on our debt portfolio, meaning we are not going to borrow any extra cent to finance nuclear or any other expenditure which may be unsustainable. And that's why I'm saying that as set out in the 2015 budget. So the two paragraphs basically confirms each other there.
We had figures from Minister Gordon about the debt ceiling at that point in time. Are you able to tell us from your own knowledge what was the debt ceiling at that point in time?
I don't want to, I don't have the figures with me. I wouldn't want to get into that, but
Okay.
we had a ceiling.
Okay. I am going to skip the third unnumbered paragraph unless you want to comment on it in case I overlook its importance. Is there anything you want to comment?
On paragraph?
The paragraph that follow, the one that is the third from the top.
No, I'm okay with it. I'm okay.
But I'd like to deal with the one that follows thereafter, because you make either a prediction or a factual assumption. And there you say, let me read it so that we are at one. Minister van Rooyen will not abandon the fiscal path that we have chosen in the last few years. He will strengthen the path and continue to support all efforts to improve the lives of ordinary South Africans. See that?
Yes. What I have learned to understand in my years at the Treasury, even up to at that point, when you put something like this out in public, it gives the market confidence. And in a way, for me, where I was seated, Chair, I was fighting my own battles, if you can imagine, in terms of what Mr. Fuzile said. When I say fighting my own battles, meaning I wanted to contribute in a particular way in stabilizing the situation now. In here, I'm then binding, whether I like it or not, a minister who's imposed on us in the way that he came. I am then binding with this draft that he will come. If he wants to abandon, he would have committed himself, or the presidency would have committed themselves on this, which I know was correct and true, by the way, in terms of what we said in the budget. So by saying that he will not abandon the fiscal path that we have chosen in the last few years, it means indirectly we will then force Minister van Rooyen to not deviate from what we would have said. And there'll be a statement coming from the president to confirm that he cannot. For me, it was a strategic move and a strategic point that I was putting up front to ensure that we actually maintain the fiscal discipline and ceiling that we had aspired to.
Thanks for that. That is your sense of responsibility. But on the facts, you had not yet spoken to Minister van Rooyen, correct?
Yes. No, not at all. Not at all.
You had not spoken to anyone who, at that point in time, would lawfully be entitled to speak on his behalf?
Not at all.
But, but you were including in the statement what you believed would continue as the government's position at the time.
Yes, correct, Chair, yes.
In other words, in your own mind, you couldn't imagine that there would be a departure on that aspect.
It was not only imagining, Chair, but I wanted that there should not be a departure.
Yes,
Yes.
but what I'm saying, apart from your subjective desires,
Yes.
in terms of what you understood government to be likely to do and not to be likely to do, it was something you didn't think government would do to depart from that.
Yes, at that point, I
Yes.
didn't think government would do that, yeah.
You expected a minister who is appointed by the president, who had been around for the past few years, to continue on that part of the policy.
I wanted exactly that, Chair, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We've now confirmed that you had not yet spoken to the minister, and you expected that he would not change these policy positions, which is fair, of course. But the point is this, that Mr. Fuzile said that immediately after his inauguration, Minister Van Rooyen took out a piece of paper, and I do not want to undermine the status of what he took out, but he described it as a piece of paper, and he read something from it. And that was his inaugural speech, which is now on the website. Did you have a look at that speech?
This speech was on Thursday at the, I was not there, and I have not seen him, I have not interacted with him at all. I did not know his speech. I did not contribute to his speech.
Yes, I understand. But did you subsequently read it from the website, or you had not read it at all?
I had not read it at all at this time. I had not read it. Chair, it was a very painful, for me in particular, it was a very painful period, having been at the Treasury for years. And so I had two options on the Thursday. And for me, it was, I had switched myself off from what was happening, and just because of sadness of what we were doing to ourselves. And at a later stage, obviously, when we engage on other matters, it will come through as to, because my pain started that Monday. It did not start on a Friday, Thursday or Friday. So by Thursday, I had completely switched off. I did not even listen to, nor even watch on TV the swearing-in ceremony. I had completely just taken I was too angry to watch TV that Thursday.
Yeah. I know it's events of the past, but take us along in that pain and the painful moments you experienced, because we have not yet received evidence of a witness who speaks in personal emotive terms around that event, and you make a very interesting observation. And if you can take us through it and give us more information, it will be useful. You say that you were saddened by what, and I paraphrase, we were doing to ourselves. I'd like you, if you can, and if you feel comfortable, just to take us through that emotional journey and indicate what is it so painful that we were doing to ourselves.
Well, Mr. Malek, I'm happy you have asked that question, because I've read your statement, DG, and you have just made the point that there are certain things that happened, I think, from Monday, or that you got to know from Monday, and I'm as keen as Mr. Malega is just to hear about that pain that you are talking about. Yes, thank you.
Chair, thank you very much. I would not give further details except to mention, and if Commission so feels, I will be more than happy to assist the Commission to get into more details. But what I mean about the pain is that I was at the meeting on Monday afternoon when the Treasury
Monday
team,
Monday before the
ni-
9th.
The 9th of...
Or the 9th was a Monday.
No,
No,
the
no.
9th was a Wednesday, the
the
7th was...
The 7th.
Monday the 7th.
Monday the 7th.
December 2015.
2015. In the afternoon, I was at a meeting where, as tradition, DDG Michael Sachs, myself, responsible for public finance, Michael was responsible for budget office, and Mr. Fuzile as the DG, including Mr. Nene as minister. We went to brief the president on the budget, because we were going to cabinet on Wednesday, the 9th. So I'm saying it was painful in that there was that meeting, which was a normal meeting, where we were, just presenting the budget to the president and explaining, because the budget is not one event, it's a process. So we're explaining the allocations and how we got to them. And the tone of that meeting was so cordial that, we were engaged as to how can we improve this moving forward. I left that meeting a very positive South African and public official, and I was happy. And I was even telling Mr. Fuzile and Mr. Sachs that, we had a very good meeting because it was very constructive in terms of things that we have, it's a close space with the president, which we, really appreciate in terms of suggesting things openly, around allocations, and also around, the wastage that we see, so that as president he would be aware, and he would give guidance in terms of future processes that we should engage on, around how we have to set priorities, how we have to find expression in the cabinet, the Lekgotla processes, and also find expression in the ANC government, ANC, the party aspirations, because then they will be translated into government. So it's on those bases that I say it was a very nice, good meeting. And I left on that note on Monday. Tuesday, I was also at another meeting at the same time, almost at the same venue, at the president's residence, at what then we would know later as a nuclear meeting, the NEC squared meeting, National Nuclear Energy Subcommittee of Cabinet, that committee, that long name. I was in that meeting, and the interactions in that meeting pained me. The feeling that I had the previous day was gone in terms of how the meeting ended up, and how I think at the time, the meeting went about. I was also at a meeting the following day on a Wednesday in cabinet when we presented our budget, and the way we presented our budget, and the way cabinet, including everyone in the room, interacted with the budget. And subsequent to that, then the cabinet meeting ends. Then I go home. And as I'm driving, then I get a call from somebody in the president's office because of the relationship that I indicated. It was not from Ms. Lakela Kaunda per se, but it was, as chief of staff, I interacted very closely in the previous term with Minister Gordon between 2010 and 2014. I got a call and they were looking for Minister Nene. I said, look, why are you calling me? I'm not chief of staff. He's got a chief of staff. This gentleman said, no, but you were with him just now. I said, no, I've left and he also left. So then I called him. I said, look, you are being called by the president. This was after the cabinet meeting. So now I'm saying Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then what we then came to know later in the evening, around after 8 o'clock, when it was announced that Minister Nene has been fired, basically. So it is now, and when you get into Thursday now, where I say I did not even want to watch TV, I'm now tracing back the 3 days and what I felt in the 3 days and why, and the call we got, and the message that we exchanged among each other that evening that said the X has fallen. So for me it was too painful to say, it cannot be that as an important institution like the Treasury, our own system would have interacted with us like that. So it was that's why I'm saying it was a very painful That's why I'm saying if at a later stage, and I would prefer, Chair, that I leave it at that. For
Yes,
me,
okay.
that's what I meant.
Well, if I may press you a bit, and I'm not reviving your pain, what do you think should have happened in order to avoid or lessen the pain that you had experienced? In the normal, ordinary, responsible way of doing government's business, and by that I mean Treasury's responsibility, including the executive line function, the minister, what would you have expected to happen so as to avoid or lessen the pain?
Chair, I don't get it. Is it during or after?
Take any moment
Okay.
in regard to the time and frame of reference of the painful moment you've talked about. For that pain not to arise, or if it arose, for it not to become as severe as you discuss, what are the things that you would have expected to happen differently?
I think the first thing one expected, we should not have. Firstly, Minister Nene should not have been fired, so there wouldn't have been any pain. Yeah. Because where I was seated, I didn't get the justification as to why Minister Nene should have was supposed to have been fired. Even today, when I look back, I don't clearly see the reason. Even after, and Mr. Fuzile tried to go into after in a way that we would have expected things to be, because when Minister Trevor Manuel left the Treasury and Minister Gordon came, there was a process, a handover, very process that tells you there's no crisis. When Minister Nene came on board and Minister Gordon was shifted to Kokta, again, there was a process. Now, Minister Nene comes, and after a few months, 18 months or so, I'm not sure of the time period, you can confirm that, Minister Van Rooyen comes, and there's no handover proper. It should have been done differently, in a way that, the tradition there is that the collective of the Treasury is called to what we call the banking hall. The outgoing minister gives his speech, the incoming minister gives his speech. It then tells you that, and it also tells the staff, the 1,000 plus staff of the National Treasury, that there's no crisis here, things are okay. But we didn't see any of that even after when Minister Van Rooyen came on board. That's why I'm saying it could have been done differently. And I would have certainly go back to tradition in terms of what possible and proper handover is all about.
Thank you for that. Chair, I think I have covered the issue, unless you have further questions on that issue.
Yes, no, that's fine. I'm going to do today, this afternoon, what I did, I think, was it yesterday?
Yes.
We'll take a very short adjournment. On my watch, it's 21 minutes past. We'll resume at past.
Thank you, Chair.
We're adjourned.
see him for the first time, and I could see that Mr. Fuzile was in a very somber mind, state of mind, and I could see his face was not how I used to, because I know him very well. I had worked with him since I joined the Treasury in 1999. And I could tell through his demeanor that he was reserved and he was very tense. And then, so, because we all were looking up to him, I think that immediately just made the meeting room to be tense. And so, as soon as he sat down, after saying hi, then he started trying to engage already. I just wanted to say hi to you and, and tell you that this place is going to change. Things are going to change around here and things are not going to be the same. That language. We're going to be accessible to rural people and rural areas. And now, at this time, as he was trying to go on, this must have been, say, for a minute or half a minute or so, 1.5 minutes. Mr. Momonian walks in. Mr. Momonian was also on leave on the day, but because he lives in Joburg, he was able to drive through to actually try and make the meeting. Now, Mr. Momonian, we know him. He's a very simple person, and he walks in, he sees all of us, he starts joking and say, "Oh no, welcome, Minister, welcome to the Treasury. Now you're on our side, you're not on the other side," meaning he was the member of the Standing Committee on Finance, and they would have dealt with various pieces of legislation at the time, the Twin Peaks legislation and other pieces of legislation. And then Mr. Momonian soon realized that, we're not going to smile and be happy and jolly as he was. So I think as soon as he looked at the meeting room and how tense we were all, he then decided to quietly sit down and let Mr. Van Rooyen continue with what he was trying to do. Yes. So that's what happened. The first few minutes, say 3 minutes of his talk around what he was at that point, Chair. It was, Mr. Fuzile said, but you're already in it. Why don't you try and know the people here? At least, know the people here, or even introduce. That's when Minister Van Rooyen started trying to introduce the people in the meeting room. So then he's forced, because on his either side of his, it was on his left, I think it was Mr. who I came to know later that is Mr. Bobat, Mohammed Bobat. And as he said, look, maybe we may want to know each other. This was Mr. Fuzile's sort of interjection as he was trying to carry on with his talk for the morning to us. Then he says, yeah, no, of course, I think we should introduce each other. And he kind of looked at Mr. Mohammed Bobat and he says, this is, and then Mr. Mohammed said, Mohammed, just like, because, he was trying to get his name. He says, Mohammed, and he says, yeah, no, we call him Mo. We call him Mo, and then he went to his left and said, we call him Mo, he's going to be my chief of staff. And Mohammed said, no, he did this. No, I'm advisor. Then he looked at, of course, this is Mr. Ian Wheatley, he's going to be my chief of staff. So it was clear that, for me, Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mokhatjane. Some of the things that non-lawyers might not appreciate are important. As you were giving your evidence as to what Mr. Van Rooyen said, you were making gestures. When you were telling us, and you must just confirm if what I'm saying is right, because I want it to go into the record. When you were telling us what what he said when he looked to his left, but I think you looked to your right, to his left where Mr. Bobat was, as I understand your statement.
Yes.
You stretched your hand and to point to the person that he was speaking to. Is that what he was doing, or is that just what you are doing to express what you understood, but not necessarily what he was doing? Did he point him like that? And I think at some stage, when you were indicating Mr. Bobat's response, you said, when he said, no, you were moving your hand from right to left, left to right in front of your face. Is that what Mr. Bobat was doing, gesturing as he was saying no, or is it something that you are just using to express yourself?
Chair, you are correct. Mr. Bobat was gesturing. He was Minister Van Rooyen was gesturing, in this case to his left, yes, and saying, pointing, as he was busy trying to reconnect or recollect his name and saying, this is, he was pointing at Mr. Bobat. And the same, Chair, when Mr. Bobat was responding, he was waving his finger and saying, no, meaning correcting him, but waving his finger and saying...
Waving his pointing finger.
Just as I'm pointing it up, not to him.
Yeah,
to, just
in front of Mr. Bobat's face. Just to express.
Yeah, just in front of his face, saying, no. It could have been a finger or a hand, but he was, you could see he was saying, no, it is, it's advisor, not chief of staff.
Okay, thank you. So, but I summarized it.
Yes, you summarized it well. Okay. And as he was pointing to Mr. Whitley, same thing, he was then pointing to him, and this is Ian Whitley, and he's going to be the chief of staff.
No, thank you. I interrupted you, but I wanted that to be recorded. It's got some significance for lawyers.
Chair, I'm grateful for placing on record the replay of the audio-visual scene of that moment. I'm interested in whether Mr. Whitley said anything when he was introduced as the Chief of Staff by the Minister. Did he or did he not say anything?
Mr. Whitley did not say anything.
Okay. And what happened after the Minister introduced the two individuals?
The DG then requested that he then wants to introduce his team. And he slowly introduced each one of us, indicating our names and the roles that we play in the Treasury, including those that were in acting capacity on the day, indicating who the original or the DDG is and who's not there. And he was taking his time, obviously. I think, looking back, he was then trying to prove to Mr. Van Rooyen, the Minister Van Rooyen at the time, that I know my people and I can introduce them. It came out very clear to me at the time.
Yes. And that was then about how many people that from Treasury, more or less, who were
more
there?
Or less 9, 10, 11. I mean, we can, with the names, because there are 10 divisions in the National Treasury, so it could have been around the same number. Okay. With Mr. Momoniat coming in, because I could have expected that someone who was acting on his behalf would have been in the meeting. But around 10, 11, 12. But we've got a list of the names that were people who were there.
So the DG did the introductions name by name, office by office, and then he completed the introduction, correct?
Yes.
There are some conclusions that the DG shared with us about how the introduction, if any, by the minister unfolded. And I'm not going to explain to you what those conclusions are. But what I'd like you to do for us, if you can, is to tell us that whether you too drew some conclusions about the way the introduction from the minister's side took place.
Look, I think from where I was seated, it was clear that I was seeing, obviously, Mr. Van Rooyen that week for the first time on the day, and I was experiencing the two gentlemen who were with him the first time. But the gestures that he was making and referring when he was trying to get his name really kind of gave me an indication that he may not know them, and his body language also suggested that he's not comfortable in the way he was going about in the meeting. And the conclusion, therefore, that I'm drawing is that, you know, having interacted with ministers before, and also having been a chief of staff before, and the relation that I could see in that room clearly, you know, made me realize that he may not be, you know, very familiar with the colleagues that he was with on the day. And the only observation that I can make and draw from is the introduction. Because if I expected that he would have explained in detail his chief of staff, where he was from, what he's doing, and how he's coming, what his qualification is, how he's going to be of value to the Treasury, he would have done the same with the advisor. He would have said, this is my advisor, and his background is X, he's coming from his qualification, he's an economist, or he's an accountant, whatever. Because I know in instances when I was chief of staff, Chair, to Minister Pravin Gordhan, when we had gotten one or two people to assist as advisors or as short-term consultants, I would take the pain of one as chief of staff, understanding who they are, and you know, and then would call the collective of the Treasury and saying, look, we have asked so-and-so to come and, you know, he's going to assist us in a capacity as an advisor to Minister Gordhan. He's so-and-so, his qualifications, he's going to focus on this area, etc. Now, none of that happened. And I had experienced two advisors that Minister Gordhan appointed in his first term when he was, you know, and that's how we introduced them. So, and I didn't see this happening. So, again, the conclusion suggests that if Minister was not confident to introduce the two colleagues in a way that he did, then that means he did not know them.
And you deal with that point, and I'm going to jump some few paragraphs of your statement, but just to locate your conclusion, you deal with it at page 50, paragraph 15. And there you say a little more than what you had just said about the relationship between a minister and his or her chief of staff. Can you elaborate a bit?
I had a relationship with Minister Gordhan, not very close. In the early days when I was a student, in fact, when I was a staff member at the University of Durban-Westville in the 80s and 90s. Minister Gordhan was a member of the Convocation Executive of the university. Now, if you know that university, you would know that we wouldn't go a year without issues. We would enjoy around August of every year, we just have a nice, and it was like that. And we would then, either university assembly would be called, and issues would be dealt with, or students would have traced the administration of the university, but things would be so. Now, how we resolved issues at the time, because the struggle as students, it was around council representation and all those issues, and I was also in the student activist movement. I was active in that, you know, though I was never an SRC member per se. So Minister Gordhan would come as convex because the collective of the university. So I always admired how issues would have been dealt with. And he kind of just knew me then. Later, when I joined the Treasury after 99, and in the later years, 2000, he was then at SARS. So we would have crossed paths one way or the other. So we had an idea from when I was still at maybe Durban-Westville. He saw me around in the Treasury. In 2009, I was still in Washington at the time, representing South Africa at the World Bank. And then I had indicated to some colleagues that, hey, you know, I'm okay with America. I'm fine, I want to go home and just, you know. And then, so someone whispered to...
I'm okay, not in the sense that you wanted to stay there forever.
Yes,
you
I want to
are
come
okay
back
in
home.
the sense that you have had enough.
Not had enough, not had enough. I was, Minister Trevor Manuel took me out for lunch one day in Spain on the 23rd of June, 2006. He sat with me and he said, I want you to go to Washington and I want you to do the following. One key thing that he asked me, he says, look, we have a relationship, we are going to have a challenge with ESCOM. We have to have a relationship. ESCOM will soon run into trouble. We have to understand the World Bank and at some point we'll have to get money from them. So when I left the World Bank, I had done the $3.75 billion was in the kitty. And when I say I was done, meaning my mission was complete as a secondee of the Treasury to the World Bank system to navigate that. So I had indicated to some colleagues and say, hey, you know, I think maybe next year or whenever I'll come home. But August of 2009, when I was home for holiday, because around that time is holiday, and I was going to greet my minister for the first time because he started in May, formally so. Went to his office and he says, hey, you know what, someone told me you want to come back home, I want you to come and work with me. I tried to argue and say, no, minister, you know, he said, no. He again convinced me in October of that year in Turkey, when we met again, and by December I had decided with my family that I will go back to South Africa. It's the relationship that I was talking about, Chair, that I say, he understood, he knew me, he understood that I was in the Treasury from the 90s and I understand how Treasury functions. I was in various divisions in the Treasury. I understood the work. So when I come back to be his chief of staff, he knows my background, he knows what I'm capable of, and it's on those bases, Chair, that I say the relationship between the chief of staff and the minister is quite important, because I will know what he's all about, and he will know what I can do. And as I say, it's an intimate relationship of trust and shared values generally built over a long period of time. So it was not surprising for the Treasury when I come back in 2010 to become Chief of Staff to Minister Gordon, and how then that was accepted, and what role I understood, because I was clearly a bridge between, and I understood the dynamics in paragraph 15. I understood the dynamics of the department, and I understood what is expected of the minister's office, because I had interacted with that office longer from 99 onwards in various capacities. So in that way, my point is, here are two colleagues who are not introduced to give me the comfort that they understand the dynamics of the department, they understand the work of the Treasury, understanding that Minister Van Rooyen is new, obviously, but I would have expected that Minister Van Rooyen eases himself into the department, just like at least we had an idea that Minister Gordon was the first after Minister Manuel was there for 10 years. Minister Gordon comes in, he did not come in with advisors at all. He came in 2009, he came in with admin staff, people who will understand, you know, what he likes, what kind of food he eats. And he came with such admin people from SARS, who some obviously they were known, but did not bring any advisor, nor did he bring a chief of staff. He brought some senior admin person to assist as he was busy looking. His first advisor, Mr. Fuad Kasim, was only appointed in 2010 on the 5th of January, around that time, January, but it was January, if I remember, because I had formally started as chief of staff, and I knew I interacted with him. And again, Mr. Gordon called me in, and he said, this is Fuad Kasim, and we went through the process. I knew he's an economist, I knew what is, and it was then easy to introduce him to the collective of the Treasury. So one expected that as these two new people who are going to come with Minister Van Rooyen, that we would have that kind of introduction, which again I say it should have been built over time. But again, I cannot attest and put my head on the block and say, I know that they they knew each other, they did not know each other. But what I saw suggested, and the way they were introduced, suggested that they may not know each other.
Yes. I'd like to be quick now and go through the concluding parts of the meeting. You say, and I'm going to quote the last sentence of paragraph 11 and ask you to comment on it. Are you at page 49?
Paragraph 11.
Yes. The last statement reads as follows. I have met all the finance ministers since the tenure of Minister Manuel, and from my observations, Minister Van Rooyen seemed very ill at ease and hesitant as he was talking to us. What do you mean by that?
Here is a country in turmoil from what I explained earlier in terms of the impact that, or what were we experiencing that week in South Africa. And Minister Van Rooyen is not talking to those issues. But instead, the focus of the meeting is just greeting and say, hi, I came to say hi to you. Without saying, I'm appointed, and show leadership that I expected a minister should have shown, that I expected sitting in the room, to say, welcome colleagues, thank you very much, I'm here. Let's not get into the details of how I'm here, but for the fact that I'm here, let's work together. 1, 2, we are in trouble. 3, how can we address the challenges? Because the rand was taking a tumbling, Chair. So I didn't get the sense of the authority insofar as issues that mattered on the day. But what I saw was the fact that I'm coming to sort you out. When he said this place is going to change, what did he mean by saying this place? I think he had preconceived views about us and about the collective that he was going to engage with. And that's why I'm saying, secondly, for the fact that he did not mention issues that were related to what was affecting the country on the day, then it seemed suggested to me that he was not at ease, or he was hesitant in addressing those issues. Because the reality is that he could have said, maybe I'm the cause of the issues. Because the reality is that the economy was taking a beating because of exactly someone who's appointed, who the markets did not have an idea of, and second, who the market did not respect. And that was demonstrated by the impact that the appointment caused.
Yes.
Well, I don't know whether, when you said he could have said, I'm the cause, whether that's because that's what you believe is the position. But we know that he didn't make, or we believe he didn't appoint himself. He was appointed to the position. And there's nothing that we know that may suggest that he was responsible for the removal of his predecessor.
Chair, I agree with you completely. Yeah.
But I guess what you meant was the perceptions that were driving the markets to do what they were doing were connected. He was a factor in that.
Yes, he was a factor. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you say in paragraph 12 that the meeting lasted for about 20 minutes? Is that correct?
It is correct, sir, yes.
And you say there was nothing substantive that was discussed at that meeting?
Yes, it's correct.
And then what was the response of you and your colleague now that we know how the introductions had gone about, and we also know that nothing substantive was discussed? I mean, how did you respond?
I can simply sum it up by saying, as officials of the Treasury, we were all stunned.
Stunned?
Stunned, yes. Stunned.
And
meaning we were stunned. We were just, we didn't know what was happening. We were like, we didn't have words, or I did not have words to explain what I was witnessing on the day.
And then you reference the important name at the Treasury at that time, and that was Minister or Deputy Minister Jonas.
He was absent in the meeting. He did not form part of the meeting on the morning.
Was he not invited to the meeting?
He was not at the meeting, no.
Do you or don't you know that he was invited to that meeting?
I don't know if you are, but you know, I can't recall exactly if he was part of the, but I would imagine, which is standard practice in the Treasury, that such meetings where minister is going to engage with the rest of the senior managers, that the deputy minister would be invited to a meeting like that.
Yes.
So
I mean, that's standard practice. It has happened. He was not the first or the last deputy minister. There have been predecessors before him, and there have been successors. I mean,
yes, as I say, in such meetings where the minister engages with the DDGs in the Treasury, it's standard. Even the assistants, even now, they know that they will invite the deputy. Whether he's there or not, it's another thing. But there will be such a standing invitation. But I guess for a meeting as important as that meeting, when a new minister of finance is being introduced to his senior managers, that you know, a deputy minister is not there, it's very unusual. I would have expected that he would want to make himself available, or he should be in the meeting.
yes. I'm sure the issue will be explored with Mr. Jonas when he resumes his testimony. But from your side, that absence you describe as conspicuous and highly unusual. What signals did it send to you, if you can speak for yourself?
It simply said to me that there are challenges. There's something that's not going right. Because remember, I'm connecting now what I said earlier, the demeanor of Mr. Fuzile, and the fact that Deputy Minister Jonas is not here, and that the tone of the meeting is tense, and that this place is going to be changing. All of that, the connection of that tells me that things were not in a good shape, including between the minister and the deputy minister.
Yes. And then in paragraph 14, you express the impression arising from how the meeting unfolded. You have made some points regarding that impression, but can I ask you to sum up by reading that paragraph?
My impression of this short engagement was that Minister Van Rooyen did not appear to be confident in this role. He did not appear to know the two people he came with. Minister Van Rooyen was only just sworn in on Thursday and had already appointed an advisor and a chief of staff by Friday morning.
Yes. We've dealt with paragraph 15, and in paragraph 16, you revert back to the draft statement that you had prepared. And you say that you raised the issue of the draft statement with Mr. Fuzile, and what was his response?
He angrily just indicated to me that I should just send this statement to the presidency. He did not even read it. He was just too angry to interact with the statement. So I then took it upon myself as soon as I was back at my desk to send the press button to send it to the presidency.
Yes. And in paragraph 17, you draw some conclusions about the presence of Minister Van Rooyen and his two, the two individuals that accompanied him. Can you just tell us what the conclusion that you draw is?
This was the last time I saw engaged with Minister Van Rooyen, Mr. Mohamed Bobat, and Mr. Ian Wheatley at the Treasury. After this meeting, I did see them again later in my interactions with the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs.
Do you now meet with them in a different capacity?
I don't meet them. I have never. The only time I met Mr. Wheatley,
yes,
and Mr. Bobat was at a lobby of a hotel at the BRICS Summit in Xiamen in China last year. I just bumped into them, greeted them, and they were all in the lobby. And I didn't recall them very well. It took me a while for me to connect the dots.
Yes.
That was the last time I saw them.
All right. All right. Chair, one last question. The revolving door of ministerial engagement with Treasury did not stop with Minister Van Rooyen.
Not at all.
You now have a new minister,
Yes.
Minister Mboweni.
Yes, sir.
Does he have advisors and chief of staff?
Minister Mboweni does not have advisors. Minister Mboweni has a chief of staff who is Mr. Malon Geswind, who used to work with Minister Nene. And he also has a PA in Mary Marumo who used to work with Minister Nene. And he constantly say that the Treasury will be his advisors. And we had an agreement that as and when needed, based on specific responsibilities, issues that we want to deal with, and we don't have the necessary competence in the Treasury, that we will then see if there's a need to actually acquire those services from anywhere else, if we deem so. But currently, there are no advisors to the Treasury.
So you as Treasury are the in-house advisors of Minister Mboweni?
Yes, the same way that we were previously.
Chair, that will be the end of our questions to Mr. Mohajani.
Thank you, Mr. Maleka. I have one or two questions for you, Mr. Mohajani. We heard from Mr. Fuzile's evidence in the past 2 days that he had had interactions with Mr. Van Rooyen prior to Mr. Van Rooyen's appointment as Minister of Finance. And he had those interactions because Mr. Van Rooyen was a member of the Standing Committee on Finance in Parliament. Had you had any interactions with Mr. Van Rooyen in his capacity as a member of the Standing Committee on Finance prior to his appointment?
I never had any interaction with Mr. Van Rooyen except in committee when he maybe would ask a question and I would respond as the delegation coming from the National Treasury. But I did not have any relations with him. I did not even have his phone numbers at all.
So whatever interactions you had would have been in a committee meeting between the committee and Treasury, National Treasury.
Yes, Chair, yes.
Yes. Now, he didn't say much at that meeting, but the one thing he did say, according to you, and I think that is consistent with what Mr. Fuzile also said, namely that this place is going to change and it's going to be accessible to rural people. In the interactions in committee between National Treasury and the Standing Committee on Finance, had there been any complaints maybe voiced by him or anybody about National Treasury that might relate to how accessible National Treasury is to rural people or not?
Not that I don't remember any particular interaction with Mr. Van Rooyen, with the Treasury, insofar as the issues that the Chair you're mentioning. But generally, there has always been a narrative that says Treasury is neoliberal, Treasury is a problem, Treasury, which is normal. I mean, and we've learned to accept that because we have tend to develop thick skin over the years in that we will not be always likable because of the kind of responsibilities and job that we do, obviously given to us by the Constitution. So I think people might have had views about the Treasury, and some of them would be articulated differently, but I don't remember any situation where Mr. Van Rooyen took us on in terms of his views about the Treasury in committee. I don't remember that.
But leaving Mr. Van Rooyen aside, were you then or are you now aware of there being maybe sections of society or certain people or organizations or groups of people whose criticism of National Treasury includes anything along the lines that National Treasury is not accessible to rural people or to people in general. In other words, was this something that you could associate with anybody, or was it just a new thing completely to you?
Chair, it will always be with people who would not want to understand or agree with the fact that we've got a particular role given to us by the Constitution, given to us by the MFMA and PFMA. Because these three pieces of legislation, firstly, as we know, the Constitution established the National Treasury. It gives us certain powers, and I always say to colleagues in the Treasury that as you perform your functions, know that we are directed by the Constitution and the PFMA and the MFMA and other pieces of legislation. So it is not always that as we engage with these issues that, as I said, we'll be likable, we would make friends all the way. There will be those who have views about the Treasury. But also it is also then equally important that, because this view then may be a wrong view, that says we are not accessible, we are of a certain breed, that we should then make ourselves accessible in the way we engage with the departments, in the way we engage with the public, in the way we engage with business, both black and white business in South Africa, and then issues that talks about our accessibility. But however, in performing our functions, we should know that we will always not be likable. So, but however, it's also important that we strive as a department, that we work within the collective of government. We work within the collective of advancing the ideals of the NDP as I think it's important, and make sure that we achieve and improve the lives of South Africans. That's the brief. And that's the kind of culture that I'm continuing to inculcate even today in the Treasury, that we should, as much as we say no, let's say no with a smile. I know it's difficult because of the role I played as DDG Public Finance, where all 40 government departments and 1,000+ public entities will always, even now, where people will demand or ask that they want to see the DG of the National Treasury, including, and there was a newspaper article, Chair, just to divert, where Parliament said the DG of the Treasury has gone AWOL. And when the DG of the Treasury at the same time was being wanted by another committee at the same time. And the DG of the Treasury was at the same time presenting at a very critical, important workshop. So you can imagine our time now. Sometimes for other people, when you are not available, then it's issue about accessibility, and he's never available, he's always busy, he's never on the phone, he doesn't return messages. But the challenge is, our work is quite strenuous and unique in many ways. So, but I think it's important that we be seen and act to define who we are, and because we are working within a collective, and that's critically important.
Yes, but are you saying that this was kind of criticism, because it seems to have been criticism that you people, this place is not accessible to rural people. Are you saying that you could not associate this criticism with any particular grouping, or it was not something you had particularly had, or that had registered in your mind as being a complaint against National Treasury?
No, Chair, I attributed that statement to many things.
Yes, tell us
that
about
has to do with the Treasury and the stance that we took on major things. And it's worse now after the fact, years later, that I then finally tried to understand what that means. The stance that we took on, as an example, which is a fact now around nuclear and our approach. And the stance that I said we took as in the discussions, especially the 8th of December discussions at the meeting of the nuclear meeting. And finally, what now is public knowledge in terms of the views articulated by both Minister Nene and Minister Gordon as the reasons why Minister Nene was removed. Then it's clear for me now, after the fact, that it was no coincidence that we are viewed as a stumbling block to certain things. We are viewed as being inaccessible we are viewed as arrogant, etc. And all of these things then manifest itself in many ways, to me, to say a view that people have. It's not the other issues that I mentioned earlier around people accessibility and so on in doing our job, but it's also us clearly now in terms of a blockage where evidence came from the various people before me, a blockage to what essentially was deemed as the state capture by the former public protector in terms of the report and what this commission is all about. So it is, I am already combining these things, and it is then for that reason that we were seen to be inaccessible, and we are seen to be arrogant, and we are seen to be Mr. and Mrs. Nose as we embark on our responsibilities.
No, thank you. Unless there is something arising there, there's nothing.
No, Chair. There's nothing from my side.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahajane, for coming forward to give the evidence and assist the Commission. You know already, I'm sure by now, what I've been saying all along about asking current DGs and past DGs and other people to come forward and assist the Commission. We are grateful to you. I'm also grateful that you are still going to come back because there is more that you want to share with the Commission from what I've seen, and we are interested in hearing whatever you have that may fall under the terms of reference, and I've no doubt that the legal team will make sure, if it has not already done so, that they obtain that information from you and at the right time. I'm sure that you will come back. But thank you very much, and you are excused.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pretorius.
DCJ, we then adjourn until Monday for the evidence of Ms. Makanda as well as Mr. Manye. The only problem, however, is whether we begin at 9 or 10. We have caught up some time, and we're on time if we start at 10.
We are on time.
Yes.
And that assurance is
I give
is more
no
reliable.
assurances, DCJ. I'm not as bold as my colleagues.
So you suggest that we stick to normal starting time?
10 o'clock. It just allows preparation to
Yes.
take place conveniently.
Yes. Okay, all right. We will adjourn now, and then we'll resume on Monday at 10 o'clock when we'll hear evidence from another official from the National Treasury, Ms. Makanda, and thereafter we will hear Mr. Mzwanele Manyi. We adjourn.
All right.